I'm Michael Knowles, here to tell you that Rules for Retrogrades, the book and the show, are out now, and you absolutely need to check it out before the thought police confiscate all of it and lock you away.
Rules for Retrogrades out today. Counter disruption. We're disrupting the plans of the radicals. Everyone pick up a copy if you don't already have one. And if you do have one, please leave a review in all the relevant places so that we get it into the hands of all the people that need it. Rules for Retrogrades. Rise.
Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades out there. Today, I am solo. Dave is still in transit in his cross-state move, but I'm not completely solo because I'm here with Mr. AJ Barker, an exciting guest I'd like to introduce to you. AJ co-wrote a book with an NBA player named Royce White. And today we're going to be talking about the natural virtues, particularly the cardinal virtues, offering a different take you might not hear so often in Catholicism, especially because it's a critical take. We'll get to that in a minute, but today I want to say what's up to AJ right now. How are you, AJ? How are you doing out there?
Tim, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
You bet, man. So you are you were an athlete. You were a wide receiver at the University of Minnesota many years ago. You look younger than you are, I'm afraid to say. But tell us about that, man. Or just really briefly, you had great success there in the Big Ten, right?
Yeah. I played there from 2009 to the fall of 2012. My last year, I was one of the better receivers in the Big Ten conference. You know, had some success there. So
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Cool experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're best friends with Royce White from the NBA, and you co-wrote a book, and we got to talking, and we started talking about the virtues, and that's what I want to jump into today. Everyone out there, picture this: we'll just stick with the four cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. Here on Rules for Retrogrades, Dave and I have, from time to time, remarked that, how can I say this diplomatically? In the conservative, traditional quarters of Catholicism, real Catholicism, for anyone from a trad to a faithful semi-trad or whatever, however, I'm not getting into that, but that whole corner of Catholicism, there is a consistent paucity or lack of emphasis on the natural virtues. And the natural virtue can mean any kind of arete or excellence that you get naturally. But today we're going to focus, me and you, AJ, on prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, because it seems, just give me your take on this right from the jump. It seems that many of the trads and semi-trads, the faithful Catholics out there, want to skip over the natural virtues in both private and public life and kind of go straight to the supernatural virtues, faith, hope, and love. What do you say?
Yeah. Well, actually, the first thought that comes to mind there is, maybe part of that reason is that the supernatural virtues are grace. So they're given to us. The natural ones do take that real sort of that confrontation, that conflict.
Right.
You have to cultivate them, and so maybe there's just a natural aversion in us to say, well, let's not be that particular about any of these, and let's focus on those, which is a great thing to do. It's great, as you would say too. It's great to focus on those supernatural virtues and make and really be in communion with them. But
so that, see, I think I'm great. That's a great start off comment, great lead off, because I think that's what it is. I think that's right what it is, actually. And I'd never put my finger on that before. I'm glad you said it. With the natural virtues, it's go out and grab, go out and take it, right? It's vini vidi vici, right? You have to go and take them yourselves. And because of this Ned Flanders pseudo-humility that's masquerading in Catholicism and Christianity in general as humility proper, there's an aversion. It's become instinctual, but it's more soft-wired than hardwired. There's an aversion that's been learned to going out and taking things. And that's natural virtue. That's natural arete, the natural arete that Aristotle's teaching our kids in schools about, hopefully teaching our kids in schools about through being read. And like you say, supernatural virtue is a grace. It's freely given once you're open. But here's the thing, man, you talk on this. Once you've moved through the natural virtues, you got to move through the natural virtues. You're not just, in most cases, given the supernatural virtues without getting a natural virtue first, are you?
Yeah. I guess I sort of think of it like we'll stumble over so many things along the way of trying to stay open to those supernatural virtues, right? Without the natural virtues, all of a sudden it's like we don't even see ourselves that well, so we're just stumbling into things. And I know, like, you guys are great on Aquinas and stuff, but he talks about sins from ignorance, sins from emotion, sins from will. It's not all ignorance, but that's part of it. But these things bleed together. So one of the comments he makes about sins from the will in regards to ignorance is, if there's something you didn't know, but knowing it wouldn't have stopped you from sinning, you still sin of the will. Right. So I think there's something there where, we have to cultivate these natural virtues so that we can be on our own game, so that we can observe when we're going well and when we're straying off, and so that we can bring ourselves in and have that really that Catholic, that Catholic communion with God, which does value works, it does value faith, it has all of that, it has all of it. It's complete. That's
a couple things. That's great. Yeah. So Aquinas calls the ordinary situation where your intellect is telling you properly what to do, but your will is weak. He calls that incontinence. Aristotle calls it unrestraint. Aquinas calls it incontinence. And it has nothing to do with adult diapers or going to the bath, pee stains on couches, right? So it's incontinence when you know clearly what to do, but you don't go do it. You move from being purely vicious. It's pure vice when you don't know quite what to do, and therefore you're not pained by doing the wrong thing, and you do the wrong thing. That's the lowest level. Then incontinence is after you've begun to notice someone that's doing the right thing, so now you're aware of the right thing, but you still keep doing the wrong thing. Then there's a dotted line in the sand after incontinence when you move up, and you're actually like, I'm going to try doing the right thing once. That's called continence. You do the right thing, but you don't have the habit to condition your will. All you have is intellect making you do it. And so you're pained by doing the right thing. And then it's the inverse of incontinence. And then above continence is true virtue, which is when you do the right thing and you receive pleasure from it.
And you're disposed toward it.
You're disposed toward it.
Right? It's like promptly, with ease, and with delight. It takes time to get to that place. And this is what's interesting about sports too, is like you try and learn a new procedural movement. It's sort of it's hacky, and it's not very good. It's not smooth. It's not natural. And in it not being smooth and natural, it actually inhibits your ability to do it. So you actually get slower. They say the fastest speed that you run at is like 96% exertion. When you're 100%, all of a sudden your quads and your hamstrings start fighting against each other, and they start forcing in, because they force in opposite directions, push and pull. And
that's interesting.
They start to hold each other up. So you have to get to a place where you're still exerting. You're still, it's like, again, a great Catholic analogy, fully human and fully divine. We as Catholics have a natural template for understanding how things can be like sort of concomitant fullnesses. And so in sports, that's what you're into, where you're fully exerting it, but you have it trained to such a level where now it's promptly, with ease, and with delight. And then it's natural. And then the game, it slows down, and you enter that zone that they love to talk about.
That's an excellent analogy, and I didn't know that about the 96% full running speed, with proportion to exertion. That's perfect, and like you say, with ease, that's true virtue. But let's take it. Let's go through really quick. Let's go through the four virtues, and I do want to. I'm sorry if it's uncomfortable for people, but I think it's at the center of what ails traditional-minded Catholicism. Why it's so fractious in traditional-minded Catholicism, why it's unattractive to a lot of people, even though our liturgy, the TLM, is the most beautiful thing on earth, arguably, or whatever. Yeah. It's still unattractive. It's because too many of the people, and I mean all of us, it's the royal we, us, are not seeing the importance of moving through natural virtue to supernatural virtue. Let's go through and talk about how each one is missing one at a time. I was going to start out with justice, because Aquinas talks about, of these four cardinal virtues, he talks about two in different ways as the uber virtue, the over virtue. But you kicked us off. What you were saying is prudence, right? Prudence is the virtue that tells you, okay, I've habituated all these excellences, arites, or virtues. I am strong and courageous. That's one. And then I'm also what Aristotle calls amicable. Like I can be just friendly. If you're in a bar having a beer with your buddy, watching the game, and a fight breaks out, your moral excellences that you've cultivated, you have more than just two, but we're only talking about two. Sometimes they go against each other. If some guy's talking trash to your buddy, you need the particular circumstances of the case to be like, this guy's really bowling him. I have to use strength and just, knock this guy out. Yeah. Versus maybe this guy's just had a few too many showing off in front of a girl and he doesn't really want to do anything. So I'll just be amicable, a la Vince Vaughn from any Vince Vaughn movie, and talk the situation down. They're both moral excellences. So which one do I pick? You have to pick between them. That's virtue, right? That's the intellectual virtue of prudence. Yeah. So I find that prudence among all of them, Aristotle calls it's the virtue, the over virtue that lets you pick, and so does Aquinas. I find that this is probably arguably the most lacking, the most often in the traditional of the church. They fight at everything. It's never amicability with traditionalists.
Well, if I can throw this idea in, I've talked this about with friends on numerous occasions. I think that there's something about the superhero comic culture, big movie blockbuster culture that we live in, that what happens with these superheroes, right? It's like there's some nobody, and they have these guys, they have one persona that's some nobody, and the person's spitting on them and they're mocking them and something else. But we as the audience, we're comfortable because we go, oh well, we know that Clark Kent's Superman. So when he wants to, he'll just get to dominate him, exactly. Right. And there's something that you learn when you play sports at a high level. It disillusions you from that. You realize, oh, there's some guys that are actually really good. There's some guys that are actually, they're actually dogs out there. And you could think of the bar example. It's like you could be sitting there and you could go, okay, this guy wants to go. Maybe justice is on my side. He's being a jerk. But if that guy knows MMA, you're probably going to be in trouble. Right. So to kind of bring that back, it's what we need prudence for. I guess I think of it this way, and you can tell me if it's that. But prudence is discerning the truth, discerning what's going on. Justice is trying to apply that. And then courage, so those two are both of the intellect. Courage is then of the will. So then that's going to, come out in applying your mode of justice. But in some cases, it's like, well, this guy's showing off for this isn't really the situation to fight this guy, to step up to him, especially because there's real consequences of fighting people. That's another thing that a lot of football players learn the hard way in college. They're lifting a lot. They're very strong. All of a sudden they're out in a bar. It's like, and they're going to fight with someone, and that's going to cause damage that other fights are not going to cause. And you're going to be, facing real legal consequences as a result. So I think there's something there of we to bring it full circle. We in this superhero sort of ethos of our modern day, we even as Catholics, we look at it and we go, well, if my prudence is right, or if I know something, or if I know that this is just, then I get to just go ahead and do whatever I want. And I think a lot of people, it's like, so you'll get a lot of people who will watch people like yourselves, like other Catholic commentators talking, and they'll sit there and like, oh, well, I've got a better take than that. I've got a better take than this guy, or I don't like this guy. Yeah. So but then they get into the arena and they realize, oh, it's actually not so easy. It's right. Tough. A lot of them don't ever get in the, but what I mean? It's like you realize that, oh, I actually have to acclimate. I actually have to exert humility at times. I have to restrain myself at times. Sometimes I do got to put that foot forward. And so I think that prudence is something that in our culture we've idealized it, and we've lost all the stages along the way of growing in it.
Yeah, that's
Understood.
really good. It's there's this fine connection. I don't know if it's universal, but I'm thinking along our wavelength here today. In traditional minded quarters of Catholicism, why is prudence so lacking? It almost always is related directly or maybe pros hen, what Aristotle would call pros hen, back to a kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, right? I know we do it a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah,
We cultivate it a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
with the clergy. We're like, this priest, I could do such a better mass to him, which I think is usually
yeah.
true. Had I been in the priesthood, I'd do such a better job. I think that's a fair
Right,
critique
right.
that a lot of people are saying. But yeah, I get a lot of it like, oh man, like Tim, I don't like this music you have at the start of the thing. I'm like, dude, I don't have,
Yeah,
this isn't Daily Wire with like a big budget thing. It's cool. I could have my own music kind of
yeah,
written. And I mean, whether you like it or not, I have
yeah,
my own music. I'm doing this out of my own house. This isn't like a $500,000 Dave Rubin sound studio that I built into my house. This is my kid's schoolroom. I have some equipment. I'm
yeah,
doing what I can do,
yeah,
and then I have some expertise, and I want to share it. But it's imprudent to always be straining at gnats, and that's what
yeah,
trads do. And I mean, the wider swath of trads where I include
yeah,
myself, they're always saying, oh, I could do better. That's where prudence, not picking the more merciful uh, um,
or even
fellow
just the
feeling.
broader view, just even the broader view of it.
Yes.
It's like they narrow in on one area of the critique, and they miss out on the context of maybe the reality of those things playing out, which is like, look, you got to pick a song, and like you said, hey, I got someone who made it, so okay, we're good, and we're rolling. Now
And
we're
we're rolling.
on to the next thing.
So
Yeah.
so that's great. So
Oh,
bring that to Fortitude, which is actually Saint Augustine brings all of
yeah.
the cardinal
Wait,
virtues.
can I throw one more thing in?
Yeah, do it.
I want to say shout out to the Catholics and all those people out there, because I'll say, like, you can read comments on Catholic videos and people know what they're talking about, right? So people
Yeah.
are. I'm honestly I'm very shocked by it. I think one of those things, a lot of people, maybe a generation older than myself, lament the social media generation, but I
Yeah.
think partly the reason is because there's a lot of people that are pretty astute out there. Even like if you go to meme culture or comments that people make, criticize, it's like they're pretty clever. Like
They are. Yeah.
I catch myself reading them. I'm like, dang, I think I'm kind of quick, but I wouldn't have come up with that. Like, who's writing that?
I know.
Like, that's good,
I
So,
know.
just shout out to the whole, like, I mean, the environment in these circles, more that what's now probably a little more right leaning, but there's even people on that left end, kind of what they would call like the dirtbag left on that end, where it's like you get kind of a similar thing. There's people they're smart, they're clever, and so Catholics,
Right.
shout out to them. I'm always like, oh man, who wants to talk anything Catholic? Because you come into the comments sections and people are throwing out, straight text from Ott's Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma and Aquinas's Summa and this, this council and that one, and you're just like, whoa, people know a lot, They're
Right.
really good.
So that's good. I'm glad you added that in because
Yeah.
prudence. We're talking about what it looks like when there's a lack of prudence. It's good to fill in the void and say this is what it looks like when prudence is not lacking. It always is a really talented person. I went to law school with some people like this. I studied graduate philosophy with a dude named Nicholas Barber. What's up, Nick? Like this, that was like so smart and are always complimenting others. And what you realize is this is prudence in action. This is the other virtue where you're like, insecure, semi-smart people or beginning smart, but not that smart people. What they do is they exaggerate their strengths and they minimize others, and they maximize others' weaknesses. Really smart people are looking around. They're like, that dude is great. They're not even thinking of themselves.
Yeah.
That dude is great. I want to copy that. I want to draw from that. I want to draw from that. They're really positive and not like a corny gay, like not like a lefty way where you're like saying stupid stuff is, everyone's a model or anything like that. It's like, no, when someone's really got a virtue, my prudence helps me to spot it. And again, I hate to have the negative emphasis when I'm trying to be positive, but this is why it's the most negative place on earth. We used to think it was Beirut in the 80s and 90s, right? Or the Middle East. Most negative place on earth is Catholic Twitter. Why? And you just, if you go on it for a day, you have to go off. You got to get therapy because it's so ugly, because there's so little of this kind of prudence.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the combination of the charity involved, which gets, it gets tough to hold that, and it gets tough to balance that dialectic, because it's really easy to go from that sort of critiquing eye to then flip over to being totally passive and indifferent, which is a modern, certainly like the Protestant or the Protestantized version of Catholicism, which is very common. And so it gets really hard for people to manage that dialectic, where it's like, we kind of just have to have that insecurity of going, of just countering each one with the other. And you just go through and you're like, okay, when I'm getting weak on this one, now I'm going to go back to this one. And then when I'm getting all right, now I'm going to go back to this one. And, we want to be everything all at once. So we want to be like the perfectly charismatic, smooth talker who's both forceful, but, dispassionate about it. And it just doesn't work. That's just not reality.
Which is Prudence, which is why we did Prudence for forget the charity. Charity's the most complex, misunderstood thing. No, table that till the end, because that's the highest of the high. Yeah. That's the highest of the three supernatural virtues. I'd argue something very distinctive, because my thesis statement is too many traditional Catholics want to skip over the natural virtues and go to the supernatural virtues. What I really meant was they want to skip over the natural virtues, and they want to go to two of the three supernatural virtues, faith and hope. And it's really mainly just faith, because it's not even so hopeful or charitable. It's mainly a kind of fideism a lot of these kids are running to. But skip all that for now. Yeah. Sure. Let's go to courage, because and you're full of great sports analogies, which is what I wanted. Yeah. Courage, here's how I'm defining it. It has to do with, there's a conceptual link to what we were saying about prudence. People that have played any challenge, but I guess sports is the main thing here. The people that have played at the highest levels, even like you say, Catholic commenting, it's always, when you're a bystander, right? And we talked about the failures of prudence involved by saying, I could do this better. It's always harder than it looks, because by definition, when you're watching pros, or I guess semi-pros if you're watching college, part of what their job description is to make it look easier, right? So you get onto the play, and all of a sudden it's the, keyboard jockey, whatever, Groiper kid or whoever it is, criticizing everything under the damn sun. And then all of a sudden they're the ones who's like, you just got asked a question by Laura Ingram on Ingram Angle, and they're stumbling over their words. It's like, courage is doing what is hard to do on the spot. And sports are the perfect place to test your mettle, right? Yeah. No, as athletes, the phrase that comes to mind, we'd be like, you don't want this smoke. Like, they're talking about that, but you don't actually want to, you don't want to enter into this fire. Like, you could say you will. All right, come on out. But they quickly realize it's something different than what they thought from the silence. So courage. I do have something to say, and I have what I think is a really good sports example, actually, from the book that I wrote. So courage is of the will, right? So it's asserting yourself in the face of something that you wouldn't want to do, for just to use simple terms. So therefore, courage is greater the more you be averse to something, right? Which is an important distinction to make. So it's like, even if other people would say something isn't courageous or that, right? It is dependent on that sort of the relationship between what are you facing and what do you do. So one of the things that I talk about in the book that I wrote with Royce is the difference between competitiveness and what we call anti-competitiveness. And some people think competitiveness is, being willing to compete, being courageous, being willing to subject yourself to loss for the sake of winning or the hope of winning. But anti-competitiveness is not, I think a lot of people would think of it in terms of not wanting competitiveness. And that would actually be more something like a-competitiveness, right? It's like the difference between apathy and antipathy. Right. Anti-competitiveness, I say, is where you actually want it to look like it's competition, because competition breeds certain fruits. We value
we value people winning through competition. So what you actually get, you can see this in an economic sense too, is you get these cartel initiatives, you get price setting, you get these things that go and stack it in your favor so you can't really lose. But it's very important to you that you try and keep the veneer of competition going.
Precisely.
And that's
Excellent.
what I lay out in this book is what I see as that sort of that aspect. And we can talk about like that's an inclination toward courage. A lot of people want that, what we could now then call anti-courage. They want something that looks courageous, but it's not compromising. It's not compromising at all. And so what I tried to do is I tried to take that sort of ethic, that idea, and say that we can trace this as a development. And some people think it's productive, but I think it's actually pretty valuable. We can trace this as occurring post-World War II in America and how it proliferates through sports, which is a really good way to directly see it, and then into economics, politics, culture, sort of society, art. We start to see it. I mean, it's like a disease. It spreads. And so in sports, one of the things I point to is that they have a monopoly. And what's fascinating, some people know this, so a lot of people don't, is that the Senate actually ruled that we would not impose antitrust laws against the NFL and the NBA and these leagues, because what they did is it used to be, the AFL and the NFL, and there was the NBA and the ABA, and then there was the USFL, right? What they did is they came together, but when they had come together into these single leagues, they now had to negotiate TV contracts. And because they had to negotiate TV contracts, they were now liable to that sort of antitrust claim. So the Senate made an exception for them. They made an exception, and they said you don't have to be torn apart by the antitrust rules in our country. And so what that did is that then changed the dynamic of how sort of the competitive structure of the league itself on the franchise level first. So you go over to Europe, and there's a system of promotion and relegation. If you're one of the bottom two teams, you can fall out of the top league and into the second league. And the difference between being in the top league and the second league can be hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And it's not you go from 200 million, you go from 10 billion to 9.8 billion. You go from 250 million to you might be insolvent and be declaring bankruptcy in a couple of years. That's a way different tension. Could you imagine if in our NBA, it's like, oh, you're one of the bottom three teams. You're going to be in the G League next year. Right. And the Reno Viper, whoever else, they're going to come up.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, it's on a franchise level. It's going to change the whole disposition toward competition itself. You're going to start to say, I actually can't risk dealing with this anti-competitiveness. I just have to actually produce something that's competitive. And so then what we saw.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. That's a great analogy. Because of a phenomenal analogy. You're like the analogy king, dude. But unfortunately, I'm sitting here worrying that the audience won't get it because kind of the secret reveal of today's thesis. We're only on virtue number 2, but we're going to run through the 4 virtues and then do the secret reveal. It's really, I think, a lack of exposure to sports. I think it's almost monolithic. To serious high level sports,
right? And it's the warping of sports too, right? It's the warping of sports as well.
Yeah,
right?
well,
so
yeah, sure.
Kids,
we'll do.
The kids who
that's
are
what makes it
sports,
easy to pin.
It's now neutered,
Yeah. Again, kick that to the end because I want people to see this really clearly. But so get back to courage and what you were saying about anti-courage and anti-competitiveness that are like a cheap stalking horse for true courage, true competitiveness.
Here's the perfect dynamic. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so here's the perfect instantiation. It's a guy telling his friends like, "Hold me back, bro. Hold me back. I want to be tough." Yeah. It's chest puffing up. You don't want to be competitive at all in terms of this. If you study classics, this Greek agonal tension that you get such a fine sense of when you read Greek tragedians. It's the agonal tension. This is what's beautiful about sports and competition. It brings out the best in everyone. True agonal tension. That's not what it is. When a guy's like, "Hold me back, bro," and he doesn't want to fight another dude, he just tells his friends to hold him back. He's saying,
Yeah.
Let's create the veneer of false competition. This is a great point. And here's what I'm saying, though. We're bringing this back to Catholicism. There's so much of that in the right-leaning, generally correct. I mean, right ideologically, and I mean generally correct too. Other sense of right.
Yeah.
Catholic world. There's so much hold me back. Whereas, like, I mean, I'm not trying to brag, but I'll debate anyone, anytime, anywhere on pretty much any subject I've spoken of. Not all of them. They're varying levels of expertise, right? My true expertise is Aristotelianism, particularly politics, and constitutionalism. Those are kind of my two areas of expertise. But there are like levels of competence, right? A professor's area of expertise is what he dissertated on. Level of competence is anything you've taken serious graduate coursework on. I'll debate anyone on category A or category B. I can't find, the only place I can find debates, man, are atheists that are cocky enough to come on and get whooped. Or, you know, Trent Horn did a debate with me. Dr. Patrick Deneen did a debate. It's really hard. And I mean, is there a lack of ostensibly, anyone who's been following the trad Catholic Twitter since Easter, is there ostensibly a lack of tension, agonal tension on Twitter? No. Everyone talks big, puffs out their chest, and I'm like, come on my show and debate me. I mean, like this. We'll have a conversation this friendly if you know how to do it, even if you beat me or I beat you. That's what sports cultivates, is true courage, true competition. You knock the other guy down, and even if you're the guy that gets knocked down, you're like, that was a good punch. You know, I'll shake your hand. I respect you now. You get all the bad blood out. But all the fake veneer of competition, showboating, keeps people from ever getting the bad blood out on the Catholic right. What do you say?
Yeah. Oh, man. Well, there's a lot there. Firstly, I ostensibly might be the word of our age. It's like, how can I have something that looks one way, but really under the surface, it's another thing. I think what kept coming to mind, and I just have a naturally, probably pathologically competitive disposition. But what comes to mind is like, okay, that person hits right. Okay, so we square up or whatever, and that person hits me. My thought isn't like, oh man, good hit, you know, or oh, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, all right, now you have to fight me every time you see me until, you know, it's just not going to end now. Now we just got to go. You're right. Like, okay, good point. We just got to go now.
Yeah.
You know, and I know we talked briefly about this the week ago, but right, like that's what people who see that, who are inclined toward that, that's what we see missing in a LeBron James. That's what we see there in spades with Michael Jordan. And, you know, with LeBron James, we're sitting there and we're going, you know, I use the example when we were talking, it's like, it's not like he is incapable of it. No. I always turn to the Eastern Conference Finals game against the Boston Celtics in 2012, Game 6. You can go look up a 15-minute clip of it on YouTube where it's taken there, and he's stone cold the whole game. And he murdered them. He went 45 points and 16 rebounds, and they win the game. And it's like, that's the disposition that we then see from Kobe night in, night out, MJ night in, night out. And that's, I think, you know, man being of spirit, and, you know, things like sin being of the will, virtue being of the will to a degree. You know, obviously the intellect's brought in, but there's just an aspect of acting things out. There's a component of LeBron where we say, look, you've got it all. You've got everything, but you don't have that will. And in particular, you don't have that will toward the things that make you vulnerable, which is the last second shot, or having to sort of creatively come up with something. If you're in your lane, you're going to dominate, you know, who you want. And I think that's like, you know, you have the ethos of that right on point when you said, like, look, I'll just debate you. Like, I'll just debate them. Like, here's where my expertise is. And like, let's go, let's figure it out. Like, let's see, we'll see. Hey, maybe you come on and you make some great counterpoints, and I gotta go recalibrate after that. But that's the attitude, which is like, it's not saying, oh, hey, you know, I'm Steph Curry, I'm a great shooter, so let's have a shooting competition. It's, well, I do that, but, you know, like, I don't know, you want to play chess? You want to maybe go play around a golf? Like, what about, can we put the football pads on? Can we see who can tackle each other? You know, you start to desire, it's borderline a sort of masochism. You start to desire what will expose you, what will make you better. And I mean, I just think that is the devotional history of the saints to a T. It's like they just look for, like, how can I humble myself more toward God?
Right.
And you read a Thomas à Kempis, and you're just like, wow, this guy is just, I mean, he's just hunting for how he can go and find that humility and expose his own pride and his own, any number of things. And I think that disposition towards self is at the foundation of courage, and it's at the foundation of what in our modern world, which is so comfortable in so many ways, people are like, if I'm not forced to do it, let me not do it. If I'm forced to, I'm going to bring another analogy, and I think of people dating back in, like, my parents' time, or probably your parents' time. It's like you had to handwrite that letter and send it off, and it's going to be, it's minimum X number of days before it gets back. That's going to change your relation to the anxiety of what you're sending versus the person who sends the text. And it's like, it's there. Are they responding? Are they not? They had to take on an emptiness. It was baked into the cake back then. And so because of that, I think people instinctually, naturally sort of acclimated to more or less degrees, not everyone great, but more or less they had to sort of acclimate toward that. And what's constitutive to that is courage, is a relationship to self, a relationship to your sort of emptinesses and your despairs, your anxieties. And I think in our modern day, what's showing, because it's even those people are still alive today, what's showing is that if you don't voluntarily dispose yourself toward that thing, which is that real cultivation of virtue, it's not stumbling into doing something that's good. It's the habit of doing it. If you don't really cultivate that, then you won't do it. You just will not seek it out, because
let me jump in. So in closing up what real courage is, you're helping me develop this so well. It's a willingness to be exposed to real world contingency, minute to minute historical vulnerability. Like, it's great to, I played basketball at a pretty high level in my day. I never boxed at a high level. And the difference is, I just box in my garage, and spar with my brother, work the speed bag, work the heavy bag. Yeah. And I used to spar with my friends, but I've never sparred against people that were aside from my buddies who had one owns an MMA dojo. I've done it a little with them, but I've never done it in front of people. Whereas when I want to test my true courage, my mettle, I want to play basketball. Or I used to when I was a young. I'm 39. Play against in a room full of people, and men have sort of showboat gene. I want to show that I'm vulnerable. I want to play against the other team's best. I want to guard their best. I want to be guarded by their best, and I want to show up the room at that. I don't want to do that with anything besides basketball, because even though I was a pretty good hands, I can throw football pretty well. I can throw pretty hard overhand right. I'm not battle tested there. See, you bringing up the Saints. They're just hungry for the suffering. They have the courage of being hungry for the historical unknowns of more and more suffering. Like Mother Teresa, she was teaching at a school in Calcutta, which is poor, and she'd gone there, and she wasn't, this was an unknown situation, but she was like, I'm not suffering enough. I need to go to the streets. There is almost none of this there's too little of it in traditional right-minded Catholicism, because people are, again, they don't want to debate. I'm thinking of a few people I know in Catholic media. They don't want to debate. They're absolutely allergically averse to taking the risk, and they just want to sit back on Twitter and make veiled critiques of people instead of actually courageously going out and putting it on the floor. Again, it's related to you pretty much only, because we don't have military training like the Spartans. The closest thing we have is sports training, and so many Catholics lack the sports training. So this brings us into temperance. You go on temperance is related it's just having a balanced approach to the virtues. It's kind of like prudence. Prudence balances them by selecting between and among them. Temperance is the approach where you're not too hot, not too cold. And again, you're talking about MJ. We just all got finished watching The Last Dance, right? 10-part documentary. Players that have a lot of pride, like Reggie Miller, Isaiah Thomas, They're like, I don't want to piss off MJ because the way I want to be temperate. I want to hold my own. Even Steve Kerr talked about it as a teammate. MJ could really light into his teammates because he had insane competitive fire, like Kobe Bryant, unlike LeBron James. So right. I want to hold my own. I want this guy to respect me. He's the best in the world, best there will ever be. But I don't want to piss him off too much because if I do, he'll go for 38 points in the second half like he did against Reggie. Yeah. Right? So how does Temperance figure in? How is it lacking from the Catholic world?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think about with sports that's a really good skill that some people have and other people don't. And I think this is not the completion of Temperance, right? So first we talk about how do we enter into Temperance? And then the second part would be, well, how do we develop then the habit, which then it really sort of becomes the Temperance, which is that sort of that middle ground, that balance. Well, first we have to figure out, we have to overshoot it. First we have to be able to just inhibit ourselves, sort of against our will. There's that agony involved in it. And so I think of the athlete, there's ones who can emotionally suppress themselves and not repress, right? Repression is when you're kicking it out without you knowing it and it manifests other things. Suppression is a deliberate act where it's like, okay, my nerves are going, but of my mind, I am pushing that down and I am continuing on. And so I think that the first part of developing temperance, right, whether that's toward the three appetites, food, sex, and drugs, it's like the first thing you have to do is you have to just take the force of will toward it and suppress it. Right? Yeah. You have to struggle with that, and you have to realize, like, as you get going, one thing that I've developed a thought around is the difference between temporary discipline and infinite discipline. Temporary discipline is like, okay, I've been drinking alcohol. I want to not drink alcohol for the next month. That's going to be an act of will, right? You're just going to, you don't need a reason structure around it. You're just going to try and not do it. Infinite discipline is saying, I'm not going to set the date that this endpoint is. It's now, I'm striving to infinitely be able to do that thing. And once you enter that terrain, all of a sudden your will goes, it kind of gets disinterested, or it lapses. And you realize that now I have to merge the intellect with the will. So you can't, like we said early on about the ignorance, you can't just take the knowledge and just be good because your will can still be in defiance of it. But if you start the process of developing that will, which is, as people would say, it's extreme. Okay, yep, fine. You're beating your chest that much harder, and people go, oh, they're. I'm sure there's plenty of terms that I just don't know for it, but someone who's some version of Catholicism where they're overdoing all the, I don't know, the manly parts of it or whatever they'd call it. Yeah, they're being too strict, too rigid about it. But that's the entry point into it. Is you go there, then you learn about it, you develop the intellect, which now you enter into that place where it flips for you, where it switches, and you go, oh, now I don't want to do that thing. Right? For me, like, look, it is a long struggle with, especially in this culture, with the sexual passions. So it was taking an effort of trying to do it, that will, failing over and over again. And then for me, it was when I read John Paul II's Love and Responsibility, which is a really, thorough, detailed, really profound conception of the human person, how it relates to others, and then how a relationship and love can prosper and not do that. For me, then it clicked, and it was like, oh, it went from me counting the days that I'm not doing, to just being like, oh, now it's become an infinite discipline. And that's been years now, where it's been years. Once something's been happening for years, you're like, okay, I'm not really still playing the game with myself of whether my will, like, it's just different. It's in a different place.
Well, you've changed your disposition. You've changed your disposition. That's what habitus is.
Yep. And I think people don't realize you can do that, right? They don't even realize that can happen, where it actually flips. For me, there's people Google my name, they'll see that I got in trouble for smoking marijuana, right? I can't avoid it. It is the reality of it. And so I had to spend time after my football career, because now I don't have all these things that I feel very accomplished in, an achievement. And so to continue smoking marijuana, all of a sudden it was like, man, this is just despair on despair. Things were going good, and I was it's not like it was healthy, but I was taking advantage of those good things to then indulge myself. And I had to try and I didn't have to, but I was like, man, I want to try and figure this out. And so I would use that will, and I'd say, I'm just not doing it. I'm not doing it. It wasn't until I pieced together this little idea to myself that, okay, how, like, it was a conception, again, of that human person, to bridge it up with John Paul, which I said that, okay, drugs, and I had studied some neuroscience and psychology. Drugs are psychoactive substances. They act on the neurological substrate of the person. They're not nourishment. You don't take them in and they fuel your body as food does. They're for the brain. So I posed this own question to myself. Look, do I think that my being, all that I am, not just my body, but my relationships, all that I am, do I think all that exists for my brain? Or do I think my brain exists for my being? And when I framed it that way, then it clicked for me. And then my will united with my intellect. And I said, oh, I don't want to do that act because that's fundamentally in service of my psychological substrate, of my sort of phenomenological experience. And I had already been trying not to do it. And so, but then it merged. And again, now it's been over a half decade where it's like, okay, I'm not still wrestling with myself of whether I really overcame that or not. And I think I mean, look, to hammer home the point that there really is a philosophy that people think all of our being exists for our brain, they can look up transhumanism. It's the idea that everything in the universe evolves for the sake of intelligence. And that's where then, you get the Joe Rogan, Elon Musk podcast, which I watch just like anyone, and they're super entertaining. But the ethic underlying it is, at a certain point, we'll just transcend these bodies because what matters is the information in the brain. And I think that if one tries to take a sort of an eye of looking at that, they can say, no, I actually don't think that. I don't think that my being exists for my brain. I think my brain exists for my being. And those are the things that then merge, and now we start to really develop the temperance, which then becomes sort of that humble middle ground where you don't have to fight people for why they need to do it, but you're like, no, this is a genuine good, and I'll affirm that it's a good, right? I won't scurry away from that. I think, we're talking about right Catholics, right-leaning Catholics, but that's left-leaning Catholics, and
it's everyone,
and non-Catholics in a nutshell. It's like they've just scurried away. They've said, I say, Protestants took all sin, venial, and collapsed it into mortal. Venial and mortal collapsed into mortal. What we see in the Catholic trend is taking all sin, venial and mortal, and collapsing it into venial, right? So that nothing you really do, like, you didn't fully know. So, okay, so we can annul that divorce, and we can, you don't really have to, your confessions or your whatever else. It's like, look, I understand God's not bound by the sacraments, and he can work in ways outside of us, and people can be saved outside of what we can, readily sort of pin down. But to think that then undermines that there's a real value and a real reasonability to the Catholic faith and the deposit of faith, and that it genuinely leads towards one betterment in more ways than just that sort of spiritual, supernatural way. It leads to your betterment psychologically, emotionally, relationally, even physically, right? That's the things that it's like, look, I think that's what our, if I can throw this in, I'm only 29 years old, but if I can throw that in, that I think it seems to me, that's what my instinct is, that this is what's going to play out over the next 100 years, is trying to wrestle, maybe shorter, maybe longer, wrestle that dialectic where the Catholic faith comes to realize, like, okay, there is something to a sort of a humility and an openness to people, but there's also the affirmation of sort of what needs to happen, and where we say, look,
even to the council, there's an openness even to the stuff I don't like about you. You're pointing some of it out. I famously don't care much for Love and Responsibility by JP2 or his other documents on that. No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm going the other way. The temperate thing that's lacking in right-leaning Catholic circles is just to say, oh, I don't like that. It's like, no, you're making good points. To Cole, the temperate thing is to say, okay, I think tradition is best. I don't like modern stuff, but okay, this is what the hand we're dealt now, right? This is a real council, whatever. Like, let's see what's pure garbage and just needs to be tossed out. And let's see if there are things that are not pure garbage and don't need to be tossed out. And therefore, we as traditional-minded Catholics have the responsibility of being temperate, and it's utterly, probably the most lacking one of all of these virtues, maybe charity. I was using temperance point of aside in an analogical sense. I'm not saying that in traditional-minded Catholicism people largely lack struggling with touch and taste, which is how Aristotle defines it. I mean, this is one people have understand. I mean, a temperate response to things, and you were going in that direction. But like when you were talking about, and I want to move on in a sec, but when you were talking about permanent versus temporary temperance,
I call it
well, the thing I was thinking is
infinite.
Think about secular society will accept a boxer's temperance, a boxer's chastity.
Yeah.
Like everyone in Rocky, everyone will cheer, oh, okay, you lay off the pet shop dame, as Mick tells Rocky. They'll say, yeah, you can get the most secular person in the world to win a fight for 6 weeks. It's Thanksgiving, lay off the pet shop dame until New Year's Day or whatever. That's fine. But once you extend it to the realm of permanence and you say this is, or not permanence, but at least until you get married, you got to be sexually temperate. Society rejects it. But for point of clarity, I didn't mean, I meant in the analogical way. I think temperance is the most lacking cardinal virtue in trad Catholicism in the way that you and I have laid out. The final one is justice. And justice is just the proper disposition with regard to giving each his due. And a lot of times, justice ends up lacking because of, again, I want to take it back to the lack of sort of just fair-minded, non-biased competition. In traditional Catholicism, people refuse to hash it out, to debate. And when I said earlier, I forget what cardinal virtue we were doing when I said it, the second or the third. I said, after someone knocks me down, because I'm competitive too.
Mm-hmm.
If someone knocks me down, even with a punch, or takes me off guard in a debate or one-on-one basketball or whatever, yes, I'm like you. I do have the psycho gene where it's like, I want to come back. But there is, unless you're actually a real psycho, you come back with respect the next time you come back. You're like, I got to keep going till I beat this guy, like Fraser playing his dad at chess. He gets beaten by Martin at chess, and so he's waking him up in the middle of the night. He can't be beaten by his dad at chess. But there is a growing, burgeoning respect there that when you're just, the respect that you have for someone that beats you, even if you're really competitive and you have the MJ/Kobe Mamba mentality, rather than the loser LeBron James sulk about it and just get the media to write a story about how you're great even when you lose. Oh, it's great. You made it to the finals 8 years in a row, even though you lost most of the time. That's all LeBron James does. It's a loser kind of SJW mentality versus Kobe MJ. I want to go win. But the good part about winning that's just, that again is lacking, I think, in right Catholicism is the spirit of contest. I want to debate. If I get beat, I'll look at what I did wrong and what the other guy did right, and I want to go beat him again. That's fine. You see the distinction? Because I'm like you.
Oh, absolutely. I think naturally, if your attitude is, oh, I want to get back at you so that I can avenge the thing that just happened, then you're just thinking, okay, I just want to get back out there. If your attitude instead is, I really view this as a testing of myself. Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And so I want to sharpen it. Part of that getting back out there, changing that, you'll naturally be attracted to being now reasonable and more humble about what's going on, because it will make you better. It'll make you better at what you're doing.
Yes.
But if you just sidestep that, if you just avoid it, okay, you beat me, now I'm going to recklessly fly in there again. You're not really caring about what I would say. You're not really caring about beating that person.
And you're also not caring about giving to each his due. If you're not like you beat me fair. That was a fair fight. That was a fair game. If you're like, oh, the refs called it uneven, like middle school, babies will just say it was always unevenly called if they lost. That's what's great about MMA and boxing. As much as Catholics clutch their pearls about that, all the smack talking when they're clowning each other, the clowning sessions, before the fight.
Yep.
They're always saying stuff, but they always go up at the end after 12 rounds of heavyweight boxing. Like, this guy's the greatest in the world. He beat me fair and square. That's what Catholics utterly lack. And if I can bring it around now, I think justice, giving each to each his due, is almost self-explanatory. That's the hidden thesis of this show I wanted to do. I wanted Catholics to watch it. If you put sports in the title, question asked, question answered, they won't watch it. So we have to pitch this as, where's the only place in a non-militaristic society like Sparta or something that the average person can learn these 4 cardinal natural virtues? I think it's sports, man. And they're so many Catholics are so averse to them because sports has been a domain without Catholicism, and Catholicism has become a domain without sports. And guys like me and you are trying to integrate them and bring Catholicism into sports and sports into Catholicism. What do you say?
Yeah. You know, I coach football at a local Catholic high school, and I love the opportunity to drop what I think are little gems about, hey, here we can, you know, let's use this thing. I probably won't say, hey, you know, let's systematically lay out the virtues, but I draw from that Catholic understanding because there's so much there. And you can see the kids, because, you know, at Catholic schools these days, not everyone's even Catholic in a lot of schools, you know, whatever. But you can use language where all of a sudden you can see they lock in, it starts to resonate because you're giving them sort of a real substance. And I think that, you know, I love, there's certain great athletes. I'm always excited when I find out that they're Catholic, because it's like, makes sense. And you don't know that for sure. But, you know, the ones who come to mind, it's like Kobe Bryant. You find out he's Catholic, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. You know, another one that I like to reference is Luke Kuechly, who, you know, linebacker for the Carolina Panthers. Like, are probably the best linebacker to ever play the game, or one of them.
You think he's the best of all time?
I mean, I don't know.
He's way up there.
He's in that tier. He's in the conversation. He had like 5 straight seasons of 150 tackles or whatever. And I know that stat's probably not going to be accurate, but I mean,
no, it's a lot.
He's just a monster, and he can do every aspect. He can intercept passes. He can return them for touchdowns. He'll tackle everything. You know, I mean, probably 250 pounds. He can run, agile. I mean, everything. And it's like full Catholic education. And you go back into the history of the 20th century, and so many of these thinkers that are famous on the left or in, you know, sort of the postmodern whatever ethos, a lot of them raised Catholic. It's like, I don't think there's a coincidence there. I mean, you can even go to people like a Michel Foucault, who had a totally, you know, sort of superstar intellectual role throughout the world, raised Catholic. Like, I don't think that those things are just, you know, entirely unrelated. It's like the foundations that you build there are.
Bro, you skipped Rocky Marciano, the only undefeated champ boxer in the history of professional prize fighting. I mean, literally daily mass goer, and it's not at all. It's not
Nick Saban, daily mass goer.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, I don't know how we could make the point any starker, because sometimes, you know, as a basketball coach, parents will ask me, like, how do you get your kids interested in sports? I'm like, I don't know. Me and my brothers never had to get
same.
Yeah, when you got it, you got it. But at the very least, I don't know. I've never known how to answer that question. At the very least, what I would say is quit demonizing, like, pro sports, even though there are a lot of scumbags in there and they demonize themselves. There's not, I mean, when we do, you know, I've interviewed 2 heavyweight boxing champs, Buster Douglas, Bone Crusher Smith. They're 2 of probably the least popular episodes. I've interviewed Super Bowl champions, you know, with Taylor Marshall. We interviewed Harrison Butker, and Super Bowl champion in Greg the Leg. Yeah, and people have no interest in it. And it's like, at the very least, and anytime I even make a sports analogy, I can make movie analogies and everyone likes that. I don't figure this out. You make a sports analogy, they hate it. Sports are better, riper for analogies. And I'll tell you something else, man. I haven't talked about this on the videos here a lot on Rules for Retrogrades, but since Easter, since I've been engaged in the trad wars, right?
Right.
SSPX stuff. It's like, dude, I'll tell you something, man. I will willingly, because of virtues that I cultivated really in being a serious basketball player, I really do ascribe it to that.
Yeah.
Mind being like the bad boy. I don't mind on behalf of what I'm saying. I'm checking my math. I'm checking my algebra. Like, no, that's fine. If I have to be the bad boy, in the sense of say things that even my own crowd doesn't like, it's a virtue I've cultivated because they need to, at some level, people have to get this. Like, sports are really important because the four cardinal virtues are really important, and the four cardinal virtues are different in men and women. They're really hard, almost impossible to get in a non-military culture, which we don't have. We're so fat, happy, complacent, and comfortable. The only place that I think men can realistically get them is in sports, and so many of these Catholic talking heads, you could just tell, know nothing about sports, care nothing about sports, and therefore it's fake agonal tension, whatever you called it, the veneer. And they get mad if you challenge. I don't get mad if you challenge me. Like, I'm going to take another look at love and responsibility because of what you said. I still know areas that are problematic, but I like it when someone challenges me because
I'd probably be interested to hear those, have the conversation about it, because so much of what I took away was trying to fill in that conception of the person that he's dealing with in the very abstract sense. And I felt that I reconciled it pretty well. That sort of object subject, that sort of German idealism, 18th, 19th century German idealism. There's there's a lot that's certainly problematic. There's a lot there too, though. And there was something where I started to view it in certain ways, not what he was saying, but it sort of clicked for me. And then I was like, oh, okay, I see how we can then follow these things by sort of logical extension.
It's just an example. I'm just saying, literally, maybe I check my guns at the door. I check when you enter into conflict, even if you're the stronger army. I was just playing Risk last week, played a few nights in a row. Even if you are up in reinforcements and you're trying to attack an area in Risk, you might have 10 reinforcements and the other guy might have 4 and you feel really cocky. All it takes is a 3 bad rolls, and then you're down 4-4. That happens in real life battle, where even though on paper you're supposed to be the bigger, stronger army, better general, you lose. And they're like, maybe I'm not the better general. Same thing with debate. Same thing with positions. I might come across as this really confident guy. I've said I'll debate anyone. I really honestly will. But that doesn't mean that I'm 100% sure I'm right. That would be, as Thomas Aquinas says, that would be false courage. That's not really facing fear.
Yeah.
So it's important.
You're saying, look, I'll step into the arena. No, I don't know. I don't have a guarantee that I'm going to win. And I think for most people, they conflate those two because they think, well, why would I step into an arena that I'm not going to win in? But it's like, no, that's just the beginning. Like it's like, it's with all those temperance virtues we're talking about. It's like, you don't do them so that's the achievement. It's like, no, that's only the beginning. Now you can actually start the spiritual life. Like those aren't the goal. It's like you hammer that out. It's like fundamentals. You learn how to dribble with your right and your left hand, how to shoot a layup with your right and your left hand. You learn those things because now I can actually start really playing. Now I can really get creative.
Right.
Now I can really elevate my game. And so I think, for a lot of people, maybe missing that sports, which is so bodily too, which is very Catholic, right? I think it's probably not a coincidence that we are all sort of drifting toward a Gnosticism type of thing, because there's a bodily fundamentally, right? That's the difference between Christ and every single other world religion, is that in the Christian, in our Christian faith, God incarnated himself. He incarnated himself and became man.
He was a man. He was God too.
Zeus. Yeah, he wasn't Zeus like coming down and, impregnating some really attractive queen of some country and like having this kid and that kid. He incarnated himself. And so he took on a bodily form. He said, no, I can manifest myself in the flesh.
Right.
In the bodily
he would have liked
form.
sports.
And now,
he would have liked
now you can relate to me because it's like there's a neuroscience thing where it's like we have this area of our brain. I think I'd butcher it. I think it's Wernicke's area or something. But it's you get to see, that might be a language one actually. I've got that wrong. But you get to see faces and things. So you'll look at the clouds and all of a sudden you'll see faces. Like we naturally, we naturally incline ourselves toward human to human interaction. There's so much there in the countenance and things like that. I mean, the great writers really hammer that home. The countenance of Christ, of God, the face of God. Yep. That's
we naturally anthropomorphize.
Yep. And
Amen.
So God becomes man. He incarnates himself, becomes man, so that we can now instinctively relate to him, body to body.
Right.
Body to body. And now we can
work
grow
any
up
other
from there.
way.
So it's like what's nice about sports is like, yeah, okay, of course it's not the only way to cultivate, the natural virtues, but it's a really good way, and it really engages the body. And there's a beauty to it. I think, you and I, we're in agreement on that. Like we find something beautiful in sports. We're drawn toward it. In itself, we enjoy watching it. And obviously there's tons of people in our modern culture who feel the same way. And of course they even take it to an inordinate extreme where it becomes a form of worship and liturgy for them to watch their sports. And
that's what you
right.
You'll get that criticism on the right. They've made it their own liturgy. That's not what we're doing. We're just guys like you and me and Dave, who's not here today, are right in the hylomorphic Aristotelian body and soul and body center. Yeah, you get the secular culture is just liturgy of watching.
You're right. The conversation with the secular culture would be in the other. Would be going in the other direction.
But we
have to go Catholics. Bring them back because we go. Okay, hold on. But if we're going Catholic, it's like, well, we're gonna need to push
right against Catholic, push left against the secular culture. I'm telling more Catholics, sports are good and realistic. We're not body haters. We're not Gnostics. We're not Manichaeans. We're not Donatists. We are Aristotelian Thomist. And the body is, your real identity lies not only in your soul, but in your body as well. And I simply don't know. I guess maybe I'm painting with a broader brush than you are. You said sports, you're not sure they're the only way to get these. Okay, military. How are young men to get justice and fortitude and probably the other two, real life, scary, prudential decision making? Temperance maybe you can get, but those three of the four cardinal virtues we did, unless you're raised in Sparta as a young man, I don't know how you're supposed to instantiate these virtues without sports. It's a really big deal. It's not a side issue. It's not a throwaway issue like, oh, Tim and Rules for Retrogrades doing a sports show because he likes sports. It is central to some of the fundamental differences. I'm not trying to be narcissistic here, but fundamental differences between me and a lot of the other Catholic talking heads out there. People are like, well, you're different. You're traditional, but what is it? It might be as reductive and as simple as sport. So what I said at the beginning, because we got to bring this around, is try to skip over the four natural virtues, which I'm saying the best way to get there, at least for young men, are sports. You try to get straight to the three supernatural virtues, faith, hope, and love. The only one I see most of these trads who are doing this, trying to skip over the natural virtues, I only see them really getting faith. I don't see a lot of hope. I definitely don't see a lot of charity. I'm not talking to all of them. I'm just talking, we have to be able to do critique. This is part of the temperance analogy I made earlier. Critique of the clergy and of liberal cultural Catholics and the secular world. We got to be able to do a critique of those three groups, but we also have to be able to do self-critique and the reviling that they hold, the loathing for sports in a kind of Platonic way, Neoplatonic way, where the body's sort of hated, is causing this attempt to skip the natural to the supernatural, and they're not getting the most important one, charity. In many of the interactions, you see it on Twitter, and they're not getting hope. It's a very non-hopeful, non-charitable life, and Christians should be joyful. This is one of those kind of gay things we got out of the 70s and 80s church. It is true, though, even if it was said by a liberal nun. You should be known by your love and by your hopefulness. Maybe there's a kind of fideism, puritanical fideism on the right that you can get from a lot of these quarters where they hate everything. Maybe there's faith. It doesn't seem like a joyful, hopeful faith, though. What do you say? I'll give you the last word.
Well, first I'd comment, you're making me rethink the sports, the sort of that this singularity of that sports path. And part of what comes to mind is like, I think you're probably right there. I think I'm so inclined towards sports that I just kind of took that as like, well, it's activity and it's engagement, and that's gonna, when I have kids one day, hopefully it's like, well, I'm gonna do that, and if they don't like this sport, there's some version of physical activity they'll like, and so I think I probably didn't consider it from that sort of intellectual perspective of saying, is this something that we would affirm and things like that. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. With the faith, with the question of faith and hope and charity, I think that I see a trend, and you can tell me what you think about this. I see a trend where, okay, Protestantism we step outside of the church, and what we're left with is scripture, right? I don't remember which Dostoevsky book. I read all of them, and it was years ago, a few years ago now. But there's one where he makes the comment that he goes, the reason that people sort of reject the church, and I'm going to be butchering this, but the reason they reject the church is because they don't want to have to defer to another man. They're fine deferring to God, but they don't want to have to defer to another man. And I think that there's something when we codify language, when it's scriptural, when it's codified, we get to sidestep that sort of natural tension that emerges in having to encounter with other people and having to, right? It's like the natural, the healthiest way to bring two people together is through de-escalation. You can conflict and escalate, but the healthiest and sort of culturally the best ethic that emerges is one of sort of a mutual de-escalation. Well, of course, that works perfectly if you put Christ in the middle. We both, de-escalate toward the one who took the lowest form, became a servant, and was obedient even unto death, right? So I think that the natural, that process of sort of pride and that sort of aversion toward humility makes us seek out in the Protestants, it makes them seek out an answer that they don't have to turn to any other man. And I think part of what we're seeing, possibly, and I don't, I probably get grilled by Catholic whatever, Catholic YouTube, Catholic Twitter. That's okay. Maybe it's good that I do get grilled by them. But part of what I think is happening is we're taking that codification of the Bible and we're expanding it to the Bible and the councils and the tradition. And we're saying, if I can turn to this, then I don't have to encounter that priest or this ethic out here in the church, which is very disturbing to me. And it's disturbing to me as well, right? But there's something different between seeing it, saying it's disturbing, and going, okay, so now I'm going to evade it, right? But those are different inclinations toward the thing, right? I think that there is, like I said, we do have a something going on where we're collapsing all mortal and venial sin into venial sin, and it certainly supports a sort of universalism type approach, which again
in the Novus Ordo Church, not in the trad churches. They're doing a different thing.
This is the other end. This is the other end of Catholicism. But right, there's something for people who cultivate natural virtues. They look at that and they go, no, not that. I can't do that. I can't have this convert down into that, because these natural virtues they're real, and they're real things that I interact with, and just throwing them aside and saying anything goes. It's not just neutral. It's not just, okay, I see it that way and you see it that way. It's like, no, that's a crisis, and that's a problem. Yeah. And this stuff all starts to fall apart. So we get that reaction where we go, no, we're going to fight for those things, and we're going to fight for them in principle. And I do think that that's right, but there is a process that the church makes real. It makes it a inescapable reality, that there's something that's tangible about it, that you interact with, that it's person to person. And there is something about that that's just, it's very instinctively kind of maybe just unperfect. It's just not perfect. You know what I mean? And so we get stressed out by it. And
so two things on that note, and then we got to close, because this is really active thinking. We went in directions I didn't think. I just think this really
I didn't think we'd go in these directions either.
But so two things. One, this is why, as much as we are all intrigued by Rod Dreher's book, Benedict Option, it's not right. We can't retreat from the culture. We have to stay in there and fight for the culture, because, the commandment number one is love God. But commandment number two, most often, we're supposed to do this through loving each other. Yeah. Jesus' two commandments. And to love each other means we have to engage with each other. To engage with each other means that we do have to, this is the second point I was going to raise, in de-escalating tension between each other, particularly on the Catholic right, unite the clans and all that. You can't do it without one, defining who the clans are and picking, managing expectations. Like we can't unite all clans, right? Sedevacantist can't be united, but by their own definition.
Yeah.
Which clans can?
That's prudence.
That's prudence.
To know, right?
This
to know
is what we're doing with
where
prudence.
can we merge and where do I give a hard no to it, right?
But that's very good. But we unite the clans by first sorting through our legitimate differences and saying, okay, we're gonna have to figure out. It doesn't have to be today, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. But if we're really gonna unite the clans, this is just a band-aid to say that platitude anthem thing. Unite the clan. Who and over what? What are the legitimate divides and who's the most right? Maybe it's kind of a compromise. Some of these issues are the principle of the excluded middle where you can't compromise, but you have to have a legitimate, dispassionate combat or sports-like contest where you're not mad at the other team. You're like, oh man, they run the triangle offense really well. Maybe I'm going to work on this for a couple weeks and try a modified triangle offense. And maybe, they raise some points that I don't like. But everyone on the Catholic right, almost everyone, a lot of the talking heads are unwilling to be exposed to that risk that comes from natural contest. And I want people out there to see this is a criticism of our ranks, that we are not going to see improvement until we look ourselves to it and just say, look, we should see more debate, good spirited debate.
Yeah.
Where you're going hard. People like that I'll do this with my friend Steve Skojic. He's one of my closest friends on the Catholic right, but he's a little more SSPX friendly. But it does nothing but make us better friends. We have honest, contestant debate in preservation of that agonal spirit of the ancient Greeks, particularly the tragedian.
Yeah.
And you get that through sports. And I mean, Steve Skojic likes football. He's one of the ones that wants to do, no surprise, he wants to do a show on all things not Catholic. I think sports are one of them. He's a New York Giants fan. I need to be able to talk to some of these people, to humanize them, to anthropomorphize them, like seeing faces in a cloud, about something besides the points of Catholicism that we agree about or disagree about. We have humans. Our Lord was a human. He would have liked sports. He had interests that were distinctly human, that were not all about his mission, right? There are side, accidental, efficient, material instances of being human. And also there's a second relationship between sports and what's deep, and it's the bridge. It's getting those natural virtues that, if we're not in a military culture, we can only get from sports. But hey, man, I've really appreciated this. I think you are just full of wisdom, and I'm really happy with how this show went. So AJ Barker,
very nice of you to say. Thank you.
No, I'm being sincere, man. The book is MMA X NBA, and the X is like a V, right? What's the subtitle?
Yeah, A Critique of Modern Sport in America.
We're gonna put that up on the screen.
Yeah, and it's 80 pages, so it doesn't. I try and not waste the time at all, but it builds out. First part is, it's not like a personal journey of someone. It's systematic. It builds out. It says what's the component parts of sport, what's going on. Then I talk about that anti-competitiveness, and then I talk about the sort of the public sphere. So whatever comes of it comes of it. But I like, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the
That's awesome.
On there. So
yeah, I always try to be honest about which people I'm interviewing, whose books I've read, I've partially read.
Sure.
I haven't looked at it, but I can fully endorse this thing. Hearing you've kind of laid bare a system that you and Royce White together wrote. So, anyway, man, we will maybe when something happens in the world of sports that's relevant for Catholicism, maybe you'll be our go-to guy. We appreciate your time.
Be awesome.
Everyone out there, next week is Cath Min Gov week on Rules for Retrograde. I'm really excited. Monday through Friday, we have a big Cath Min Gov name each day of the week. A liberty-loving, America-loving, free enterprise-loving Catholic that is helping me give voice to this show to resist the post-liberal trend. And it is a fad the post-liberal fad in Catholicism that says America's bad, liberty's bad, which is un-Catholic, small government is bad, we need Catholic big government. No, no, no. Cath Min Gov Week is all about resisting that, and it is Monday through Friday of next week, so everyone stay tuned. Have a great day. Thanks, AJ.